When Elena Carter lost her husband during childbirth, she was left alone to raise their twin sons, Isaiah and Micah, in a crumbling apartment on the edge of New Orleans. Her only asset? A small sandwich shop she and her husband once dreamed would sustain them. But Elena didn't choose comfort. She chose legacy. Despite ridicule from her community, Elena sold her only shop to save money for her son's education. She worked 3 jobs, went hungry so they could eat, and poured every ounce of love into their future. 20 years later, the world watched in awe as her sons returned not just with degrees, but with a vision to honor their mother with a community center, a scholarship fund, and a legacy built from sacrifice. This is the powerful story of a Black woman's unshakable love and the sons who proved she was never foolish, only faithful. Subscribe for more cinematic, emotional stories based on true heart and fictional framing from Stories of Fairness. New Orleans, 2005. The storm hadn't touched the city yet, but for Elena Carter, everything was already shattered. She sat alone in a sterile hospital room, still in her delivery gown, her arms wrapped around 2 sleeping infants, twin boys born just hours earlier. The walls echoed with silence. No celebration, no balloons, just the weight of grief pressing down on her chest. Marcus, her husband, had died that morning on a construction site accident crushed beneath a collapsing scaffold just blocks from the hospital. He'd been rushing to see her before the delivery. He never made it. The nurse didn't have the heart to speak. Instead, she laid the 2 swaddled babies into Elena's trembling arms and whispered, "You have 2 beautiful sons." Elena stared at them through swollen eyes. One stirred, his fingers curling around her thumb. The other's breath puffed gently against her chest. "Isaiah," she whispered. "Micah." The names Marcus had picked from the worn pages of his childhood Bible. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she pressed her lips to each tiny forehead. "You lost your father before your first breath," she murmured, voice breaking, "but I swear, I won't let you lose anything else." Outside the window, the sky rumbled faintly with the threat of distant thunder. Inside, Elena held her boys tighter, as if the world might try to take them too. She was 25, widowed, jobless, and now the sole protector of 2 fragile lives. She didn't know how she would do it, but in that dim hospital room, Elena Carter made a silent, unshakable vow to raise her sons with love, dignity, and purpose, no matter the cost. And that was how their story began. With heartbreak, with promise, with a mother who refused to break even when the world did. When Elena Carter lost her husband during childbirth, she was left alone to raise their twin sons, Isaiah and Micah, in a crumbling apartment on the edge of New Orleans. Her only asset? A small sandwich shop she and her husband once dreamed would sustain them. But Elena didn't choose comfort. She chose legacy. Despite ridicule from her community, Elena sold her only shop to save money for her son's education. She worked 3 jobs, went hungry so they could eat, and poured every ounce of love into their future. 20 years later, the world watched in awe as her sons returned not just with degrees, but with a vision to honor their mother with a community center, a scholarship fund, and a legacy built from sacrifice. This is the powerful story of a Black woman's unshakable love and the sons who proved she was never foolish, only faithful. Subscribe for more cinematic, emotional stories based on true heart and fictional framing from Stories of Fairness. The sign on the sandwich shop read, "Closed until further notice," but the truth was harder. It would never open again. 2 months after Marcus's death, Elena stood inside the little deli he had built from scratch. The chairs were stacked, the cash register was empty, and behind the counter, a single photo of them from happier days tilted slightly on the wall. She had tried to keep it running, juggling bottles and babies, warming bottles while flipping eggs, but reality hit hard. Business had dropped, supplies ran out, and the landlord started knocking. Elena sold the shop. Neighbors whispered behind her back as the "for sale" sign went up. "Foolish woman," one said. "She'll regret it," another muttered. "All that just to send boys to school?" One woman even pulled her aside at the market. "You need that shop, Elena. Your sons won't remember this sacrifice. Boys leave, always do." Elena smiled tightly. "These boys? They're staying. Maybe not in this house, but in the world. They'll change it." The money from the shop was barely enough to cover rent in a smaller apartment uptown, buy secondhand cribs, and pay for part-time daycare so she could return to work. She picked up a cleaning job at a dentist's office and ironed clothes for neighbors on weekends. The apartment was cramped, just 1 bedroom and a kitchen barely large enough to stand in, but it had a library a few blocks away. And that, to Elena, meant possibility. Each day she walked there with the boys in a double stroller, weaving past cracked sidewalks and shouting teens. She'd read them everything: animal books, weather books, fairy tales, science. Micah giggled at the sound of rhymes. Isaiah pointed at the engines in every picture book. They were too young to understand, but Elena knew what she was doing. She wasn't just raising sons. She was planting seeds, and the world would see what bloomed. The new apartment smelled like mold and mop water, but Elena didn't flinch. It was the only place she could afford after selling the shop, and the only place that let her keep both boys without question. It had bars on the windows and graffiti on the stairwell, but inside, it was sacred, because inside she had them. She converted one corner of the living room into a makeshift nursery, stacked milk crates for shelves, a broken rocking chair, and 2 secondhand cribs she scrubbed clean for hours. The floors creaked, the heating barely worked. But at night, when Isaiah and Micah curled into each other like matching commas, the apartment felt like a cathedral. Elena worked nonstop. Mornings, she scrubbed dentist office floors. Afternoons, she cooked for an elderly couple across town. Nights, she ironed uniforms and hemmed pants for neighbors. Some weeks, all she ate was rice and broth, but the boys always fed. She tracked their feedings in a notebook, logged nap times, and borrowed parenting books from the library like they were sacred texts. She stitched baby clothes from old curtains, made wipes from cut-up t-shirts, and every night, no matter how tired, she read them a story. Fairy tales, science books, folk tales from the Caribbean, stories of clever heroes, brave girls, magical animals, and long journeys. Sometimes she didn't finish reading before falling asleep in the middle of a sentence. But it didn't matter, because when Isaiah started mimicking words before he turned 2, and Micah began humming lullabies before he could form full sentences, she knew. They were listening. They were absorbing everything. And one night, as she held both boys in her arms after a long shift, Isaiah reached up and touched her cheek. "Mommy," he whispered. Micah echoed, "Happy." Elena's throat tightened. She looked down at them and smiled through tears. "I am," she whispered. "I am now." Outside, the city rumbled with noise, with judgment, with indifference. But inside, a mother, her vow, and 2 growing boys were turning survival into something sacred. The morning air in New Orleans was thick with humidity, sweat clinging to Elena's back as she walked the boys to their first day of kindergarten. Isaiah clutched a notebook. Micah held a second-hand lunchbox with a missing latch. Their uniforms were slightly oversized room to grow, she'd said. Their shoes, polished until the scuffs nearly vanished. Their hair freshly braided the night before with soft hands and whispered lullabies. They were ready, or so she thought. At the school gate, other parents gathered in clusters, laughing, chatting, their children bouncing with nervous energy. Elena stood a little apart, watching, listening. Single mom? Probably on food stamps. She's the one from the laundry building, right? She tightened her grip on Isaiah's hand. Inside the school office, she introduced herself to the counselor, Elena Carter. "I'd like to ask about the accelerated reading program, and tutoring in math, if it's available." The counselor raised an eyebrow, eyes drifting to Elena's faded blouse and the boys' taped-up folders. "We usually wait until first term to assess. Let's just see how they behave first, okay?" "They don't need to behave. They need to excel," Elena said, softly but firmly. "They're not here to pass time. They're here to change things." The counselor blinked. "I see." She didn't, but Elena did. That night, over peanut butter sandwiches and crayons, she watched the boys draw spaceships and animals with wings. She leaned in and whispered, "Tell me about what you drew." Isaiah explained how his rocket needed better fuel cells. Micah said his tiger could fly because he believed in it enough. Elena smiled. Yes, she thought. Let the world doubt. Let the schools underestimate. Let the other parents whisper. These boys weren't raised to fit in. They were born to rise. By the time the twins turned 10, life had become a quiet grind of sacrifice and routine. They were growing fast, taller than the door frames, hungrier than the fridge could manage. School brought bigger backpacks, more projects, and louder questions about a world they were starting to notice didn't always welcome boys like them. Micah began staying up late to finish art projects with scraps of cardboard and glue. Isaiah tinkered with old gadgets he found in alleys, fixing radios and remotes like it was magic. Elena watched with pride and fear. The rent had gone up, her cleaning hours were cut, and one morning, she stood in the kitchen staring at 2 slices of bread and 1 egg, trying to make it into breakfast for 3. She gave them the toast, drank water herself. That week, she picked up a third job, mopping floors in a medical clinic overnight. She moved through the halls with aching feet, humming softly to stay awake. The nurses would sometimes leave her styrofoam containers of leftover soup. She took them home, warmed them for the boys, and told them it was Mama's special recipe. One night, she collapsed. At 2 a.m., the boys found her on the floor, passed out beside a half-folded laundry basket. Isaiah called 911. Micah held her hand the whole way to the ER. She woke up to a beeping monitor and her son's terrified eyes. Just fainted, she lied. I'm fine. But they knew. From that day forward, Isaiah stopped going to the library after school. Instead, he started fixing neighborhood electronics for a few bucks. Micah began babysitting for neighbors and handing Elena the cash without being asked. They didn't say it out loud, but a shift had begun. The boys had watched her sacrifice enough. Now, they were ready to carry some of the weight. And Elena? She sat at the kitchen table that night, clutching a worn mug of tea, and looked at them across the flickering candlelight. My babies, she whispered, you're turning into men, but you'll always be my why. Outside, sirens howled. Inside, 3 hearts beat steady together in hunger, in hope, and in rising strength. At 16, Isaiah and Micah were no longer boys. They were young men with calloused hands, sharp minds, and matching fire in their eyes. That spring, both of them received letters of acceptance into the Louisiana Future Leaders STEM program, a prestigious summer initiative in Baton Rouge. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But there was only one full scholarship, and Isaiah got it. Micah smiled when he read the news. He even hugged his brother tight, congratulated him, and helped him pack. But Elena saw the way his shoulders dropped, the way he didn't finish his cereal, the way he lingered in the doorway when Isaiah left for orientation. That night, she went into her bedroom, opened a box buried beneath winter sweaters, and pulled out her mother's wedding ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a faded engraving on the inside, "To love is to build." Elena stared at it for a long time, then wrapped it in tissue and walked 3 blocks to a pawn shop that stayed open late. The man behind the counter examined it and offered less than half of what it was worth. She took it anyway. The next day, Micah found an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a bus ticket to Baton Rouge, a list of supplies, and a note in Elena's handwriting. This program was made for 2. Go find your piece of the sky. When he looked up, Elena was folding towels at the sink like nothing had happened. You sold Grandma's ring, he said. She didn't deny it. You shouldn't have, he whispered. She turned to him, tired but unshaken. You shouldn't have to stay behind. Micah broke down. He buried his face into her shoulder and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the unbearable weight of being loved so fiercely. That summer, both boys attended the program. Isaiah built a prototype for a smart water filtration system. Micah assisted in emergency response training, learning to splint broken bones and restart stalled hearts. And Elena? She worked night shifts, skipped meals, and kept a journal of every phone call, every update, every text. On the final day of the program, the twins came home with medals and project photos. They ran up the stairs to their apartment, shouting and laughing. Elena opened the door, her eyes lit up. Then she hugged them so tightly that for a moment they weren't future leaders or teenage boys. They were just her babies, still on the road, but never walking it alone. Senior year brought pressure like never before. College applications, scholarship deadlines, part-time jobs, and exams. It was a tidal wave, and the Carter household was barely staying afloat. Elena was pushing herself harder than ever. She picked up weekend shifts cleaning office buildings uptown and rarely slept more than 4 hours a night. Her shoulders ached, her ankles swelled, but she smiled through it all. Until one cold November morning. She collapsed while scrubbing the marble floors of a downtown lobby. The mop clattered to the ground. She fell against a filing cabinet, breath short, vision spinning. Someone called an ambulance. She was admitted for dehydration and exhaustion. The doctor gently warned, if you keep this up, your heart might not forgive you. Isaiah and Micah arrived within the hour. Isaiah held her hand in the ER. Micah paced back and forth, fists clenched. They'd seen their mother tired, but they had never seen her this fragile. That night, after she was discharged, the boys sat her down. No more triple shifts, Isaiah said. No more skipping meals, Micah added. I'm fine, Elena insisted. It was just one. No, they said in unison. We're not letting you break yourself for us. The next morning, they got to work. Isaiah launched a small freelance tech service online, designing websites, fixing software bugs, even tutoring younger students in coding. Micah started a neighborhood health initiative teaching CPR at churches and doing minor first aid for low-income families. Word spread fast. They began earning small but steady income, enough to cover utilities, enough to buy groceries, enough for Elena to take a breath. When she tried to argue, Isaiah looked her in the eyes and said, "We're not doing this instead of you, Mom. We're doing this because of you." And something in her finally cracked, not from sadness, but from release. For the first time in 17 years, she slept through the night without an alarm. When she woke up to the sound of her sons laughing in the kitchen, she lay still for a moment, listening, breathing. The promise she had made on the day they were born to raise them, protect them, and give them a future was still alive. But now, for the first time, she wasn't carrying it alone. They were rising, and this time they were lifting her too. The twins' high school graduation felt like the final page of a long, handwritten book. Isaiah crossed the stage, first top of his class, scholarship letters in his backpack, his name printed in bold on the principal's list. Micah followed seconds later, proudly wearing the gold sash of the state science fair champion. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, phone in hand, barely able to take a photo through the tears streaming down her face. Her hands trembled, but her heart soared. They'd made it. Back home, the celebration was small, just the three of them, a pot of red beans and rice, and a cupcake each with one candle. But to Elena, it was everything. 2 weeks later, the real weight settled in, college tuition. Isaiah was accepted to MIT's biomedical systems program. Micah had been offered a seat at Morehouse for pre-med. But scholarships only covered part of the cost. Elena ran the numbers on the back of a grocery receipt again and again. Rent, textbooks, travel, deposits. Nothing added up. The twins noticed. Of course they did. "We'll defer a year," Isaiah said. "We'll work, save, figure it out," Micah added. "No," Elena said sharply. "You won't." "But, no." She looked at them both, her voice low, fierce. "I didn't carry you this far for you to pause." That night, she made the hardest decision of her life. She walked into a payday loan office, signed her name on a dotted line she couldn't afford to follow, and walked out with barely enough to cover the boys' travel, deposit, and first semester fees, but at the cost of drowning interest and mounting debt. She didn't sleep that night. But when she watched her sons board the Greyhound the next morning, bags in hand and eyes full of promise, she stood tall. Isaiah hugged her and whispered, "I'll make something that saves lives." Micah followed, saying, "I'll be someone who heals them." Elena smiled, kissed their foreheads, and stepped back as the doors hissed shut. The bus pulled away. And for the first time since the day they were born, her home was quiet. She sat on the steps and whispered, "Go change the world. I'll be right here," holding the door open. 4 years passed in what felt like a lifetime. The apartment stayed the same tiny, cracked tiles and the same creaky chair by the window. But Elena? She changed. She grew older. Yes, her back ached more, her hands moved slower, but her spirit? It never dimmed. She worked long shifts, skipped meals when she had to, and kept every letter the boys sent taped neatly on the kitchen wall like scripture. Isaiah's letters came from Boston, filled with technical jargon. She didn't always understand terms like prosthetic calibration and biosensor alignment. But she read every word, smiling at every "love you" Mom scribbled at the end. Micah's emails were more emotional. Stories from the ER, lives saved, mistakes made, nights without sleep. His signature always read, "Your son, who still bandages things like you taught me." And then, one warm afternoon in May, there was a knock at the door. Elena opened it to find a sleek black SUV parked in front of the building. The back door opened, and there they were. Micah stepped out in dark blue scrubs. Isaiah wore a fitted blazer, a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Their hair was different, their postures taller, but their eyes were still hers. "Pack a bag, Mama," Micah grinned. Isaiah added, "It's time." Confused, she hesitated, but followed. They drove across town to a quiet block she didn't recognize. New developments, fresh sidewalks, young trees. They pulled into a small parking lot beside a building with wide windows, wooden beams, and a glowing sign overhead. Elena's place. Books, coffee, community. Isaiah opened the passenger door. "We built this," he said. Micah added, "from our scholarships, our jobs, our hearts." Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted beans and hope. Books lined the walls. Children sat at low tables reading picture books aloud. College students huddled over laptops. At the back corner, a plaque on the wall read, "In honor of Elena Carter, for raising men who lift the world." Elena's hand trembled as she reached out to touch it. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You already said it," Isaiah smiled. "Every time you fed us first. Every time you read to us when you hadn't slept," Micah added. They took her hands and led her to a soft chair in the sunlit corner. "You don't have to fight anymore, Mama," Micah said. "This place is yours now," Isaiah whispered. Elena looked around at the shelves, the children, the coffee mugs stamped with "Strong like Elena." She exhaled, fully, finally. They had returned. Not just as sons, but as men who turned her sacrifices into legacy. Years passed gently now, not with storms, but with steady winds. Elena's place became more than a cafe. It became a sanctuary. Every Saturday morning, Elena hosted free reading circles for children who reminded her of Isaiah and Micah, bright-eyed, hungry to be seen. Parents from the neighborhood dropped off their kids with a smile and trust. University students volunteered, teachers donated books. The back room of the cafe became a hub of possibility. And Elena? She became a legend, though she never saw herself that way. Micah, now a trauma surgeon, flew in every month to check on her. Isaiah, a lead biomedical systems designer, had his own lab now but never missed a Sunday call. Between them, they started a foundation, the Carter Scholarship Fund, offering full rides to children of single mothers pursuing science or medicine. On her 60th birthday, the twins pulled off a surprise she never expected. They drove her to the edge of town, to a quiet cul-de-sac shaded by mango trees. In the middle stood a pristine white bungalow, its porch wrapped in flowering vines. A gold plaque by the gate read, "Carter House, a home built by love." She froze on the sidewalk. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You accepted night shifts and hunger so we could have textbooks," Isaiah said. "You slept on floors so we could have dreams," Micah added. This is ours to give." Inside the house hung framed photos, Marcus holding her in that old sandwich shop, the boys at different ages, and one she hadn't seen. A candid shot of her asleep at the kitchen table, head resting on Isaiah's workbook. They'd captured it on a night she thought no one was watching. That evening, they threw a housewarming party. Librarians, old neighbors, former teachers. Even some of the same people who once whispered, "She's wasting her time." Now they said nothing, or they said thank you. A reporter from the local paper asked Elena, "What's the secret? How did you raise two men like this?" Elena looked at her sons, then at the children running in the yard. "I didn't raise men," she said. "I raised love, and love raised everything else." In the months that followed, the Carter Foundation opened a new school and health center in her childhood neighborhood, the Elena Carter Community Academy. It had solar panels, a STEM lab, a nurse's office, and a mural of Elena holding a book in one hand and two children in the other. On opening day, a little girl named Amira tugged at her sweater. "Miss Elena," she said shyly, "I want to be a doctor like your son. Can I?" Elena knelt, even though her knees ached, and whispered, "You can be anything. Start here, then fly." That night, she sat on her new porch, the wind brushing against her cheeks, stars lighting the sky. Somewhere, a plane flew overhead. Maybe Micah was on it. Maybe Isaiah had helped build it. Didn't matter, because she knew. Her vow had outlived her struggle. Her love had become legacy, and her boys had become the kind of men the world needs more of. She smiled up at the stars. "Marcus." They flew,